Meet me in Mark chapter 7 this morning. If you got a Bible, you can open up or power up. We're going to be in Mark chapter 7 today. And if you're our guest this morning, we're just working our way through the Gospel of Mark over the last several weeks, and in particular, a section of the Gospel of Mark where we're watching Jesus train and transform the men and women that followed him from passive bystanders and cynical outsiders into the people that history would say look and sound more like Jesus than just about anybody history has ever known. And up to this point, we've been watching as it seems like day after day, Jesus puts these people into situations that make them really uncomfortable. He asks them to do things that they couldn't do, things that they'd never done before, and in a lot of ways we're pretty sure wouldn't work from the very beginning. And yet he sent them on these impossible missions. He walked with them through impossible storms, used them to meet impossible needs, trying to teach them to organize their lives in such a way that they were actively trusting him and organizing their whole life to the point that they actually get to see who he is and what he's up to in real time every single day in the world where they live. And that's good for us because what we've said is we tend to organize our lives the exact opposite way. We organize our lives to make sure we never find ourselves in a moment, certainly not an ordinary moment, where we actually need Jesus to show up at all. But then often wondering why we so infrequently get to see him show up in our everyday lives. So far, a lot of the focus that we've seen as we've walked through these first several chapters of this book is on the inner life, the needs that we feel, the storms that we face on the inside. But this morning, Jesus is going to give us a glimpse at how we live towards a watching world, to show his followers that the supernatural life that he offers isn't just believable. It's not just understandable or thinkable. It's actually livable in everyday life. And honestly, that's where it gets really exciting to follow Jesus, but it's also where a bunch of us get stuck. Because it's possible to know a whole lot about Jesus, even to begin to apply some of that internally, for it to never show up on the surface of our life, and certainly not in the interactions that we have with people that we cross paths with every single day. So several years ago, my mother-in-law got me a subscription to an online streaming platform called Masterclass. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they've taken a bunch of the world's leading experts and performers in several different categories who teach sessions to try to teach you how to do what they do. So you can learn how to smoke a brisket from Aaron Franklin, or how to play tennis like Serena Williams, or do gymnastics like Simone Biles, or DJ like Questlove. Even cruise through menopause like Halle Berry. There's a master class for that. Just about anything that you want to learn how to do, they went and found one of the best to ever do it and asked them to teach you all their secrets. And it's pretty cool. So I went through several of them. It's fascinating to hear their mindset and how they think through different things. I even picked up a couple of tips along the way. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, despite all of Simone Biles' work, I still cannot do a back handspring. I know. Nobody's asking me to DJ their wedding, even though Questlove taught me. I can cuss like Gordon Ramsay, but I still can't cook like him. Because I watched them do it. I listened to them explain it step by step. But I wasn't in the gym with Simone Biles. Gordon Ramsay wasn't in the kitchen alongside me. And even though I took really great notes with all of the master classes, it never really translated to real life. This morning, we're going to watch a master class that Jesus gives on living towards the world where we find ourselves every day. But not just for us to take notes, not just for us to be inspired with how good Jesus is at this. The whole point of what he shows is designed to be an invitation for people who follow him to walk with him, to learn to live this way too. Jesus is training those of us that follow him to live alongside him on the front edge of where God is wanting to work in our everyday world. Which means, this morning, you're not a follower of Jesus, you're off the hook. You don't have to try to live this. You don't have to try to apply any of this at all. But what I would just encourage you this morning is, even if you don't try any of this, I just want you to imagine, what if we did? And perhaps consider if one of the problems that you who don't follow Jesus have with Jesus isn't a problem with Jesus at all. It's actually that some of the people that you've met who claim to follow Jesus don't follow Jesus in some of these specific ways. What you begin to notice as you follow Jesus through the Gospels is the thing that makes him so compelling isn't just his power. It's not just his capacity over situations and the circumstances that he finds himself in. It's actually the kind of person that he is toward the world and the people in the world where we live. The way he tells the truth without crushing people under its weight. The way he moves towards brokenness that everybody else seems to move away from. The way that people leave encounters with him filled with wonder and awe, even before they've got him figured out. So over the years, I started to notice that when people consistently live at the intersection of grace and truth and wonder over time, they become people that genuinely love God and their neighbors really well. But if any one of those ingredients, grace and truth and wonder, gets left out of the mix, you end up with something that's unhelpful or unkind, and ultimately that ends up unloving. So if you have grace and truth, but you don't have wonder, it turns into arrogant, unhelpful platitudes. If you just have grace and wonder, but you don't have truth, you turn into just a superstition or a utopian ideal that nobody can live up to, nobody can live within. If you just have truth and wonder, but you don't have grace, it just becomes a top-shelf religious system that people can understand and argue about, that doesn't ever touch down in everyday life. What Jesus is going to show us today is a master class that invites the people who follow him to interact at the intersection of grace and truth and wonder in every moment where we live. Let's go Mark chapter 7, beginning in verse 24. As Jesus left that place, the place we left him at last week, and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and didn't want anyone to know it, yet he couldn't keep his presence a secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. So an important little detail in this story, and actually the very first verse that we read, Jesus leaves the area around the Sea of Galilee and he walks into the vicinity of a place called Tyre. That doesn't register for most of us, but it would have made the hair stand up on the back of the neck of the disciples when they realized where they were going. They're walking into a place that they would have considered, and everyone around them would have considered enemy territory. This is the kind of place that people like them would normally travel around. Occasionally travel through if they had to, but it was one of those places if you had to go through, you locked the doors of the car, kept your eyes forward, you just get through it as fast as you can kind of location. Filled with people that were nothing like them, who frankly didn't like them, and who they didn't have any reason to like. Now, you have places like that come to mind for you? And almost immediately in that place, Mark introduces us to a woman that would have checked every outsider box imaginable. This is a woman who encounters mostly Jewish men, following a Jewish rabbi. And they find themselves encountered by a Gentile woman. The Jewish people called the Gentiles dogs. Like mangy junkyard mutts. It's not a term of endearment. And bear with me, this is how they would have viewed this woman. This female dog's daughter is possessed by an unclean spirit. So when she comes into the situation, she has zero religious credential or standing whatsoever. And she also, it turns out, has zero emotional intelligence whatsoever. She interrupts Jesus, who's trying to catch his breath, and literally it says, will not stop begging Jesus to help her daughter. The idea that she will not stop begging subtly seems to indicate that she was encouraged by somebody in the group of people following Jesus to stop begging Jesus and to leave him alone. But she wouldn't. She's totally desperate. Okay, so pause for just a second and notice, she has taken the exact kind of posture Jesus has been encouraging his disciples for the last several chapters to find. I can't. Jesus can. I think I'll let him. That was the lesson at the feeding of the 5,000. That was the lesson in the storm on the lake. That was the lesson for the Pharisees and the disciples, the place that we saw them last week. This woman is coming to Jesus modeling the exact posture that he's been trying to form in the hearts of his followers. And it seems like they're trying to talk her out of her posture before Jesus. Do you see that? So if you see that, it'll make you more than a little bit uncomfortable when you see how Jesus responds to this woman. He doesn't say, "Atta girl, you got it." At least not yet. Because this isn't just a moment for her. He's drawing his followers in as well. This is a master class for us. So Jesus goes on, verse 27. He says, "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her. "For it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." And what are the disciples thinking in this moment? They're thinking, finally, like, yeah, Jesus, you get her, tell her. Like, you come here for the good, religious, put together people that God loves, the children like us. Get that dog out of here. But that's not what Jesus is doing. And pay attention in the story, she knows that's not what Jesus is doing. In fact, there's a little bit of nuance here that you can see going on below the surface. The word that Jesus uses for dogs, not the word for wild, mangy, junkyard dogs. Jesus uses the word for a puppy. And we'll get to it in a second, but before we do, notice something really important here. Jesus doesn't flatten the truth. He's not being unkind, but he doesn't avoid the truth. He doesn't pretend that distinctions don't exist. He doesn't offer just cheap sentimentality or platitudes to this woman. He names the dog-shaped elephant right there in that room alongside him. He gives her truth about the distinctions, but he does not use it as a weapon. In fact, and I can't prove this, but I wish we had video of this moment, because after all my study in this passage, I would bet you a paycheck that Jesus winked at this woman as he said what he says. He did something in this moment to let this woman know that despite clear differences and stereotypes between them, that he was not set against her, that he's for her. He tells her the truth, but she sees his love even inside the challenge of this moment. She doesn't leave the moment offended. She doesn't leave the moment crushed. He gives her truth, but he gives it to her in a way that invites her to lean in, to press in just a little bit more. Somehow she sees in Jesus' words and his posture towards her that he is not set against her, that they're on the same team. He's moving towards her. So look how she responds, verse 28. She said, "Lord," she replies, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." So look, she says, look, I get it. I know that I don't qualify to have religious standing with a Jewish rabbi. In fact, I know I don't deserve anything. That's not the posture that I'm taking in this moment. I don't qualify to ask anything from you, Lord. But here's the thing, Jesus. We're not even close to maxing out your power here. We're not even close to touching the limits of your mercy. We're talking about crumbs compared to what you have to give. She understands two things simultaneously based on the way that Jesus leans to her. She understands, I need grace. And Jesus has more than enough of it to give. See, the Pharisees, if you were around last week, they thought closeness to God, provision from God came through deserving it, earning it. She understands it can only come as a gift. And honestly, that's one of the things that makes Jesus unlike anybody else. I mean, most of us only know how to do one thing or the other. Some of us use truth like a hammer. We only say hard things, and we don't know how to say hard things to people carelessly and harshly, almost proudly, in person and online, right? We use the truth to score points or to wound wounded people further. Jesus doesn't do that. But others of us, in an attempt to not do that, we avoid the truth entirely because we think love means never allowing another person to be uncomfortable. Like a doctor looking at scans from a person that needs immediate life-saving surgery saying, you're fine, everything's fine. We offer vague encouragement, sentimental platitudes that actually avoid helping a person see what's broken, needing to be restored. Jesus does something that none of us know how to do naturally. He tells the truth in a way that confronts without condemning. He refuses to avoid what's true, what's perceived, but he does it in a way that invites this woman in rather than driving her away, and she gets it. And Jesus responds to her. You see it in verses 29 and 30. Then he told her, for such a reply, I need grace, and you have plenty of it. You may go. The demons left your daughter. She went home and found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. So I think this woman walks into the story as the kind of person everybody would have assumed Jesus wanted to avoid. An outsider, a burden, an interruption, a problem, a distraction. She walks away having experienced the truth and the mercy and the power of God personally. Look, Jesus is still doing that. And honestly, if we're not careful, religious people can still miss that about him. We can become people who are content to just be technically right while making it harder for people who are desperate for Jesus to get anywhere close to him. Then immediately, Mark gives us another example. This isn't an isolated incident. These opportunities are everywhere. Look at verse 31. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. Jesus encounters another desperate outsider. You see, these stories are connected in the trust that people have in Jesus' power and mercy, a deaf man who's unable to speak well. And once again, Jesus handles him differently than religion often handles hurting people. So notice what Jesus doesn't do. Even though Jesus knows what he's going to do, he doesn't turn the man into a spectacle. He doesn't stand him up in front of the crowd and make sure all of the cameras are ready to roll for the Instagram reel. He doesn't use the man's pain to build a platform for himself. In fact, verse 33 says Jesus took the man aside, away from the crowd. That matters. Jesus treats this man with dignity. Everybody else is looking for a show, but Jesus moves the man away from the crowd and the attention and the spectacle, and he deals with him personally. He gets his hands dirty. Look what happens, verse 33. Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. So Jesus is doing sign language with a guy who can't hear and speak. He's communicating with this man in a way that the man can understand. I know what the problem is. I see you. I know what you need. I'm not going to hurt you. Then one of the most important details, verse 34 and 35, he looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, Ephphatha, which means be opened. Deep sigh is important in the story, isn't it? Jesus isn't emotionally detached from the moment. He feels the man's pain, even though he knows he's going to fix it. He doesn't look at brokenness around him clinically or coldly or impatiently. The sigh is the sound of heaven grieving at what sin and brokenness has done to the world and to the people that God's made, the people that God loves. Jesus moves toward hurting people with tender compassion. He moves towards the man. He moves towards what everybody else would have seen as a mess. He gets his hands dirty, and he holds up this man's broken dignity in the process. Even to the point, verse 36, Jesus commanded him, you see this, not to tell anyone. That feels weird, doesn't it? And in fact, when you read through the Gospels, Jesus does this two ways. Sometimes he tells somebody, hey, go tell everybody you know what's happened for you. And sometimes, like in this moment, he says, let's just keep this between us. And I think what you'll discover if you look and compare all of those stories in the story of Jesus, is that it always has to do with the dignity of the person that Jesus is helping. He doesn't want this man to become a freak show. He's restoring this man's life without ruining it. Where in other stories, to tell the story would be what brings the person dignity. This man's life is being restored, but Jesus doesn't want to turn him into a sideshow or a freak act. And yet, the more Jesus did things like this, the more people kept talking about it. You see it in verse 37. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He's done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. They won't stop talking about it, to which we think, of course they did. Because amazed people always talk. Not because somebody guilted them into sharing the message about Jesus with everybody that they knew. They're not talking because they sat through a seminar or a training session where they learned how to argue people into life. They talk because wonder always overflows. And notice what they're communicating. It's not just, do you know Jesus has some interesting ideas you ought to check out? They're not just communicating, Jesus has some hot takes on the world or corrections for your thinking in one way or another. And they say, Jesus has done everything well, which matters. Jesus isn't just coming to address one sliver of one problem in some people and in the world where we live. Mark's echoing creation language here, restoration language. Mark's saying, look, the whole world is broken. Sin has twisted life and turned it into death in every conceivable way. It's tended the world and everything in it towards darkness and despair and brokenness and hopelessness. People are cut off and separated. Outsiders are overlooked. Bodies are failing. Hearts are hardening everywhere. But when Jesus walks onto the scene, the people say, the people whose ears have been closed, they begin to hear. The silent can't stop talking. Outsiders are welcomed inside the family. Broken people find restoration and dignity and compassion. And these people walk away from the presence of Jesus saying, wow, this must be what God is like. Because the people who know him, who have experienced him, refuse to get over him. Wonder overflows from people who encounter Jesus. And honestly, that's what I think Jesus is trying to form in the people who follow him all through the Gospel of Mark. It's not just impressive religious experts, not just debaters who have all the right answers, not clean, shiny, put together people who look polished in every way and every moment. Jesus is trying to develop people who never get over who they were and never get over who he is. Because here's the truth, there are plenty of harsh, angry people in the world already at work. There's plenty of cynicism and outrage and hopelessness and try harder religion already at work in the world. What the world rarely experiences, the world where you live and I live, is men and women who live their whole lives loving God and loving others at the intersection of grace and truth and wonder. And this is an invitation to live like that. Tony Campolo tells a story you may have heard before. He was in Hawaii speaking at a conference, and jet lag had him awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. So he walked over to a Greasy Spoon diner, and the kind that's open at that time of day, where a rough, short-order cook named Harvey poured his coffee. And about the time he got his coffee at the table, a group of 8 or 9 ladies that it was clear had been working all night came into the diner. And they were loud and crude and rough. And he overheard one of them say, ladies, tomorrow's my birthday. I'm going to be 39. The other ladies were pretty nasty to her. In fact, one of them said, well, what do you want me to do? Throw you a party? And Tony Campolo said in that moment he could read defeat all over the birthday girl's face. And at that moment he made a decision. He waited till all the ladies left the diner, and then he asked the short order cook, Harvey, do those girls come in every night? The guy said, yeah, every single night. And Campolo said, yeah, the one right there in the middle of all of them? He said, yeah, that's actually Agnes. She's always here with the rest of them. And Campolo said, what do you think about throwing her a birthday party tomorrow night? Right here in the diner. So they did. Got some decorations, they hung them up. Tony Campolo found a birthday cake, made a big sign, and hung it up in the diner that says, happy birthday, Agnes. And the word got out what they were going to do. And so 3 a.m. the next morning, the diner was wall-to-wall prostitutes, a short order cook, and a psychologist and pastor when Agnes walked in. Campolo says in the moment she walked into the diner, she started sobbing. She could barely blow out the candles on the cake. In fact, when it was time to cut the cake, she asked if they wouldn't. She asked if perhaps they could even just leave it to her and let her take it home, not eat it right away so she can enjoy it a little longer. And they said, of course, it's your cake. You can do whatever you want to with it. And so she grabbed the cake and hurried home like it was her most prized possession in the world. And the whole restaurant just stood there as she left her own birthday party in stunned silence. Tony said he didn't know what to do to get everybody to scatter, so he did what a preacher does. He said, let's pray. And a diner full of prostitutes dutifully bowed their heads, and he prayed for them. And he prayed for Agnes, that God would bless her and show himself to her. And when he was done, the short order cook, Harvey, leaned over and said, hey, you never told me you were a preacher. What kind of preacher are you anyway? What kind of church are you part of? And Tony Campolo said it was one of those moments where just the right words came out. He said, I'm a part of a group of people who throw birthday parties for prostitutes at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the short order cook thought for just a second and replied, no, you don't. There's no church like that. Because if there was, I'd join it. You see, that's what Jesus is leading these people towards. Not just a church, not just an institution, not just a building, not just a gathering. A movement of people who move through the world wherever they are, whoever they're with, at the intersection of grace and truth and wonder, not just towards prostitutes, but also towards Pharisees and addicts and angry, polarized political people and burned out professionals and people-starved parents and doubters and debaters and liars and narcissists and outlaws and outcasts, so that they all get a hands-on experience of a Jesus who with us, alongside us, and through us is still in the business of doing all things well, because we refuse to get over it ourselves. Jesus wants us to learn, but he doesn't want us to forget. In fact, that's why on the night before he was crucified, fast forward just a couple of years, the night before the cross, he gathered his followers together. If you got this on the way, and go ahead and grab that and take it out. And he reminded them never, ever, ever to forget. So he took a piece of bread. You can go ahead and take that. They would have eaten bread at every meal, not just every once in a while or even every Sunday at a church service. They would have eaten it all of the time. And he says to them, this is my body broken for you. Whenever you eat this, refuse to get over it. Not just as a part of a ceremony at a church, but with every meal, every day, in every moment. Don't forget, you have a God who loves you enough to move toward your brokenness, to take it on himself, and to offer you the chance to be whole, so that you can walk with him towards other people that you meet, for the rest of your life. Jesus says, remember, don't forget. So let's remember his body broken for us and not forget this morning. Later in the meal, he took a cup. It was a cup of wine. There's grape juice in these cups so that everybody gets to participate as a part of this. And he says, I want to make you a promise. I'm going to be with you forever. You're not going to have to remember someday. But even before that, I'll be with you wherever you go. You're not on your own. I've made you new, even while all of the old hangs around. And I'm so serious about my promise of someday that I want you to be able to live in light of it this day. So whenever you drink this, remember that I am so serious about my promise to you and what I want to do within you and through you that I put my blood on the line for you to receive it, for it to become a part of you, as near to you as the next drink you take. And so for thousands of years, people that follow Jesus have remembered Jesus' blood poured out for us on the cross. Would you take this and remember? Father, it's so easy for us to forget. It's so easy for us to forget who we have been, who we were when you met us, those of us that know you, and the way that you want to live towards all of the people who need you. Lord, will you allow us to be the kinds of people who walk towards a world where all things feel broken, alongside a Jesus who does all things well. And for those who've walked into this morning, Lord, needing a Jesus like that, I pray that they wouldn't walk out of this place without understanding the truth about your mercy and your goodness and your grace and your truth. That you would allow them to realize you came to the earth to move towards the brokenness, to take it on yourself, and to offer them the chance to be whole as something that costs them nothing, that costs you everything. It's as simple as saying, I can't. Jesus can. And I think I'll let him. Would you let that be a story that's true of every single one of us and one that we refuse to get over as long as we live? We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.